Hello everybody, in this video series I'm going to be showing you how I made this Roubo Workbench. Hello all and welcome to the random episode of stuff I've got to do before I glue the workbench together. So, this one, what am I doing? I am routing the grooves for the tongue and grooves. Yeah, routing the grooves for the tongue and groove bottom panel in the bottom of the workbench. Yes, that makes sense, yes. So that was just done with a straight cutter, and then I can lower those tenons into the mortises, and mark off where that groove is with a knife to give me a nice precise line, and then get those knife marks, and square them off with a square. And then because the front stretcher is obviously a bit of a weird size above that tenon, I then use those squared off knife lines to mark onto that front stretcher to give me a precise location. So as you can see, they wrap up around the leg, and I've got two little marks there on the front stretcher, so I know where to put the groove. Now this was an issue I had, probably when I was fixing that front stretcher in the last video. If I set the marking gauge to be the same depth as one side and then transfer it to the other, there's about a millimetre difference. You can't see it there because I'm hiding it with the marking gauge, obviously. But to fix that, I just brought the height of that front stretcher down a millimetre on one side and tapered it off to nothing on the opposite, where it's perfect. And then get out the number 7, which was great fun. I always love finding excuses to use this because it's just so big. And yeah, just plane that taper back into it so the routed groove was parallel with the top of the stretcher. Routing the grooves in the legs was a little bit more difficult. So to start with, fold a bit of paper in half, plunge the router bit into it, and then you've got a bit that can scoot all around your workpiece without scratching it. So that's a great little tip there. And then I had to plunge it down and line it up with the knife lines. So those were the exact same width as my cutter. And to do that, I just used a bit of MDF and a square, clamp it in place and route as usual. To reduce the wood movement of the workbench top, it's not only attached to the tenons on the legs at the front and back, but it's also bolted down to the support stretcher that runs between the legs on the underside of the workbench. Now I was using M12 bolts for this, so they're fairly sizey, and just to give me a little bit of wiggle room side to side, I drilled a 14mm hole, so I just have a little bit of slack that I can line up with the inserts. And these holes are elongated as well to allow the top to expand and contract with the seasons. So just drilled 2 holes, slightly overlapping, no sort of hard and true rule to this. Makes some dodgy looking symbol there. And yeah, just straighten that out with a marking gauge, gave me a nice little knife line to work to, put the chisel in, and then chisel them nice and square all the way through. Now I had another little bit of a silly here because I got ahead of myself from rushing. What I wanted to do was recess the head of the bolts below the surface of the wood, and obviously to do that you've got to use a bigger drill bit. What you should do here is drill the bigger hole first and then the little ones, because Forstner bits need that central location to be able to basically drill effectively and cleanly. But because I'd already drilled out that centre section, I had to do it very slowly and very controlled. But after that was all done, gave it a quick plane to clean off all the marks and a nice chamfer. This looks dodgy, but I don't think it was. So obviously before I glue those side frames together, I need to get the tenons pre-cut, because you can't do this with the side frame when it's glued together. You've got to do it now. So David Barron says to do this on the table saw. I was going to do it on the table saw, but at this point in the year it was extremely packed, so I decided to go back to somewhat, I was going to say rudimentary methods then, but it's definitely not. But yeah, I had to rough cut it on the bandsaw. The advantage of using it on the bandsaw is that I could get those cuts right up to the shoulder line. You can't do this on a circular saw because the blade is round, obviously, so you've still got quite a lot of cleanup to do afterwards. So the bandsaw allowed me to hog away a lot of that waste and cut it off by hand, and this gave me the rough shape of the tenon. To clean it up, I enlisted the help of the ever so trusty spindle moulder. Extremely nice finishing cut from this, so I was able to get it really accurate. I just had to take it slowly, do a few test cuts, adjust the fence, test cut, adjust the fence until I got it spot on those lines that I was looking for. So unfortunately the block that I used on the spindle moulder wasn't able to reach all the way to the front of that tenon, so I marked off the remainder of that with a knife, and then like an absolute barbarian just hacked away the material that the spindle moulder wasn't able to clean up. Now obviously there was a little bit of finesse to this. That knife line allowed me to just put the chisel into it and very carefully chisel back and get that line nice and perpendicular to the top, because that joint there that I'm chiseling is what you'll see. The rest of it is kind of hidden. I'll just use the sliding bevel to see any high spots, mark them off with a pencil, and then attacked that with a chisel, and just kept doing this until the sliding bevel sat perfectly flat on the face of that tenon, especially making sure that it was touching the front of it where that joint line's due to be seen. Do you know what the hardest thing about doing videos is trying to mix in the music with it? Oh well. And finally, with all of those little jobs done, I could start thinking about gluing the frames together. So initially I just planed off all of the machine marks to get them nice and flat and smooth, and then moved on to sandpaper. At this point I'm only caring about those inside faces that I can't reach easily once it's all glued together. So think where all the mortises and tenons are due to be joined and all those difficult spaces So yeah, once that was all done, started gluing it up, which was extremely exciting. Here we go. Then obviously, while the glue was still a little bit wet, started thinking about my draw bores. So I rounded off the end ever so slightly to give it a bit of a leading edge. Then start whacking them in with the hammer. That 2mm offset turns out was a bit too much for this. So that was it hitting the tenon. This will be hitting it through the tenon. And I'm pretty sure I got most of them through to the mortise on the other side. I don't really know. Like, I managed to split a few of them as I was hitting them in, but most of them went in fine. Most of them anyway. And that is it for this episode. I haven't edited the next one yet, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, see you then.